Hope y'all are having a great weekend. Welcome to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. My name is Kaylee.
My name is Desi.
Be sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button to turn on post notifications. Before we get into this case, we always encourage those who have useful information to any unsolved case, please report it to your local police and sheriff department.
Many people go to Hollywood with great aspirations to become big movie stars or musicians. Some of them do make it and become legends. However, many of them die from drug overdoses, suffer homelessness, or die from murders. Los Angeles is not the safest place to be, but many say the risk is worth the reward. Today we will be cracking down on the Black Dahlia murder.
Betty Bessinger and her daughter were heading to the shoe repair shop at 10 a.m. in the morning of January 15th, 1947. The shop was located in what's called the Crenshaw Neighborhood of Los Angeles. When Betty passed an empty lot on Norton Avenue, they saw a body.
She said, quote unquote, "I glanced to my right and saw this very dead white body. My goodness, it was so white. It didn't look like anything more than perhaps an artificial model," end quote. This body belonged to Elizabeth Short. She laid on the ground, unclothed. Her body was split open and eyes were open.
She had multiple bruises, and it was obvious someone hit her head. The corners of her mouth had 3-inch slits. What's weird is her body had been wiped clean from blood. Betty Bessinger went to a local home and called the police department. Bessinger went back to the shoe store. After the Los Angeles Police Department identified the body, they sent out flyers to try to get more information from the public.
The flyers described her as being a 5'6" woman with black hair and green eyes, weighing about 118 pounds with crooked teeth and chewed-up fingernails. LAPD found out more information about Elizabeth. She was from Medford, Massachusetts, and decided to move to Hollywood. Many believe it was because of the Hollywood dream: fame, fashion, and money.
Like many others who struggle in LA, Elizabeth waited tables and had random periods of unemployment. The media in Hollywood would honor the victims of many unsolved murder cases like hers in Hollywood. The newspaper labeled her as the Black Dahlia because of black outfits she wore and her dyed black hair.
Her autopsy ruled that she had died because of hemorrhage and shock, which was no surprise because of the condition her body was found in. The cuts on her body were precise. This meant that a surgeon likely did it. 9 days later, the Los Angeles Examiner received an envelope. Oddly enough, it contained her social security card, birth certificate, photos, and a ripped-up address book.
Fingerprints were wiped clean from all these belongings by using gasoline. 13 letters were sent to LAPD, mocking them, signed by the Black Dahlia Avenger. The LAPD interviewed hundreds of suspects in the address books. They were cleared because many said they barely knew her and only went on a brief date with her.
The FBI decided to investigate about 300 students who attended University of Southern California. One of the letters that the police received had a fingerprint. Obviously, the police tested the fingerprint. Unfortunately, they couldn't find out whose fingerprints they were because they were not in their files. Investigators gave up on the case.
There are still 3 suspects that the LAPD should further investigate. The first one is Rob Manley, also nicknamed Rudd. He was a former salesman and an army musician. Rudd started pursuing Elizabeth a month before her death. His first encounter with her was at San Diego bus station. She was standing there alone, so he asked if she needed a ride.
According to Manley, she said no. However, he kept on asking her, which she finally gave in. When he was in town in San Diego, he would take Elizabeth on dates. Elizabeth tried to get a place in San Diego, which did not work out, so she contacted him for help. He says they stayed in the hotel together at Pacific Beach.
Robert drove them to LA the next day, then dropped Elizabeth off at the Biltmore Hotel. This was at 6:30 p.m. on January 9th. This was the last place anyone recalls seeing her alive. He took 2 polygraph tests, which he passed both of them. In 1954, doctors gave him sodium pentothal, was given to put him in a state of hypnosis to see if he was really telling the truth.
His answers still remained the same. He was still innocent. January 9th, 1986, he passed away. Coincidentally, this was 39 years after the last time he saw her at the Biltmore Hotel. 1997, the 50th anniversary of the LA Times interviewed Ralph Asdale, the last original detective of this case. Asdale said he thinks he found the man that was involved in her death.
Witnesses sent tips to him. They said they saw a man near this empty lot. Asdale also states that some witnesses even saw this man driving a black car. Asdale found a man who recently repainted his black car that looked like the one they described, but due to the lack of additional evidence, he couldn't interview this potential suspect.
The last suspect of this case is Dr. George Hodel. Retired LAPD homicide detective Steve Hodel, who is his son, by the way, strongly believed Dr. George Hodel was responsible. When he retired, he published that he believed his own dad was guilty. George Hodel was a wealthy LA doctor, and everyone knew him.
George was in charge of a sexual disease clinic. He saw many different sex workers of Hollywood from time to time. He knew his anatomy really well. Dr. George was not a surgeon. However, he attended medical school and learned a little bit about surgery. Steve says that after his father passed, he found photos of a woman who looked like Elizabeth Short.
Steve said that he believed that his father was possibly pursuing Elizabeth, that people said they saw them together at a hotel. He also states his father is responsible for the murder of Jean French. She died 3 weeks after Short. She was also found in similar horrific conditions. The initials BD were found on French's body.
What's weird is that Hodel ordered 50-pound bags of concrete for the remodeling of his house. This was exactly 1 week before Elizabeth was found dead. Steve Hodel states that similar bags were found near her body where she was found. Police believe that these bags could have been used to carry her body.
She drove a black car that looked similar to what some witnesses stated they saw. According to Steve, his father admired artist Man Ray's work. The slits on her mouth could have been inspired by his artwork, Observatory Time, The Lovers. Tamar Hodel, George's daughter, hosted big parties with Hollywood guests and artist Man Ray.
Tamar had ran away from her home in 1949 where she posed for new photos for Man Ray. Tamar went to the LAPD for sexual abuse from her father. Her father had tried to teach her how to perform oral sex at the age of 11. When she was 14 years old, her father sold her to his friends for sex. Her own father had also raped her.
Tamar gave birth to her first child at age 15 in San Francisco. She named her daughter Fauna Hodel, and Fauna was adopted by a family in Nevada. It isn't confirmed or denied whether Fauna is the biological child of her grandfather George. This is more reason why Steve believes his father is guilty as fuck.
To this day, we do not know who exactly committed this heinous crime. We do not know whether or not Fauna, the granddaughter of Dr. George Hodel, is actually his daughter. However, we do know whomever killed the Black Dahlia had to know their anatomy well and how to perform surgery. We also know that Dr. George Hodel, guilty or not, is a disgusting person who did horrific things to even his own daughter. Here are some questions. The first question is, Elizabeth Short was last seen at Biltmore Hotel. Why didn't investigators review the footage of the hotel? I do find it a little bit weird that it doesn't really talk about whether or not investigators tried to review footage at the hotel. I feel like if they did review this footage, they might have seen if Rob Manley truly did drop her off at this hotel. They would have also been able to see like who went in and out of the hotel and who may have gone into her room. One reason though why they might not have reviewed this footage is that maybe the hotel didn't want to give this footage away for some certain reasons. Another reason also could be is that maybe at that time the cameras might not have even been working at that time.
Considering this was back in the 1940s, I can imagine camera footage at that point wasn't the greatest quality. So it may be true that the investigators may have reviewed the footage, but they may not have seen anything as far as like faces or what was going on. We're talking about the 40s, baby. Technology was shit back then.
It's much better nowadays.
Well, and back then, like cameras and all that stuff weren't really as common in hotels or certain places as they are nowadays. Why did the murder of the Black Dahlia send 13 letters to the LAPD while they were trying to solve her murder? Whether it was actually the murderer or not. If it was indeed the murderer, they did this just to taunt the LAPD because they knew that they would never be able to catch him, never be able to solve the case or anything because he covered his tracks so well. But at the same time, this also could be some random person who decided to taunt the LAPD. Just for shits and giggles, of course, because we've seen that done before as well.
And it is Hollywood, so you could have someone randomly from the middle of nowhere, like bumfuck nowhere, and they're not even involved in her case at all, but just to gain some attention or whatever, this person could have just sent letters because they just wanted to feel like their 30 minutes of fame. What obviously they could have to mock the LAPD. Why did the killer send her belongings to investigators in an envelope if they didn't want to be caught? So basically, the investigators received an envelope that had like her social security card and a couple photos, and even had like I think the reason why the killer probably sent this is obviously the killer wanted to get this out of their hands, because if the police end up being able to further investigate it, if it ended up leading it to their house, if they still had her belongings, then obviously this person would have been proven to be guilty. So they decided to obviously clean these items off, to make sure like there was like no fingerprints or whatever left on them, send them back to the LAPD, because in the off chance that the LAPD goes to investigate their house, well, they're not going to find these belongings in there, so it's not going to prove them as guilty. They could have also sent this back because they basically wanted them to feel bad, and maybe they had some other victims as well, and so they were just trying to, tell the world, oh yeah, I just killed her and I'm killing a bunch of other people and you're never gonna catch me. Na 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 boo boo.
Oh fuck, the way you said it though. Na 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 na. Boo doo 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 doo. Oh, weird.
Get weirdos out there.
There's a lot of them weirdos out there in them cornfields.
Yeah. Them psychopaths.
Psychopaths. Look at that good old psychopath. He's just strolling down the street with a knife, ready to murder somebody. Oh, there he goes. Better run away.
Oh my gosh.
Robert Manley passed 2 polygraph tests, was also drugged, and his answers to the questions asked remained the same. Could he still be guilty of killing her? Very possible he still could be guilty of killing her. Just because he passed a polygraph test doesn't mean anything. And also, this drug that they drugged him with, which is labeled the truth drug, has been proven to not work, and has been proven that it's not actually a truth drug. So he still could be guilty of killing her. Many psychopaths, sociopaths, whatever, are very known to pass polygraph tests, especially more than once. They're trained to lie, trained to believe in their lies. They're very deceptive and manipulative. So it's very possible he still could be her killer, or he could still be guilty of being involved in her death.
Yeah, I think it is possible that Robert Manley could be involved, because even from his first encounter with her, she really didn't want to go in the car with him, and so she eventually gave in. Because honestly, if you're alone out there at a bus stop, she could have feared he might do something worse, so she decided to go with him. Who's to say that they, behind closed doors, that they didn't have a toxic relationship? They could have totally had a toxic relationship, and like you said, he could have been a really damn good liar.
He was trying. He just wanted some booty cheeks, and she straight up denied him. Anytime that happens to a man, they get very stuff about it, and some men are very petty that they will do anything to get revenge.
He was also the last person that anyone claimed to have, like, seen her lives.
But that doesn't always mean anything, because anything could happen between their last interaction and when she died.
Yeah, that's true. Asdale, one of the original investigators of her case, says he knows who killed her, but he never states that he can say who did. Who do we think he believed killed the Black Dahlia? Could it have been one of the other two suspects that we have mentioned? Honestly, it could be anybody, because Asdale, pretty much the only information we really get from him is that the suspect was probably driving a black car at dusk. There's so many black cars out there that's really hard to pinpoint exactly which black car it was. The only other information is that they just saw a man standing right where the location she was found. They don't really go into detail like what this man looked like, so we don't know how tall, how short, we don't know like what he looked like, his facial features, what clothing he was wearing, any of that. So honestly, that could be like anybody. It could have been either Robert Manley, or it could have been Dr. George Hodel, because Dr. George Hodel did drive a black car and he's a sus man. But again, there's just not enough details to point it towards either of those. Like, by his description, it could honestly be anybody.
Could the Black Dahlia murder and Jean French's murder be related? Both victims were found in similar horrific conditions. Being that they were found very similar ways, it is very possible they could be related, connected somehow, whether it's because they were in the same town or because it was by the same man who killed both of them. We will never know. They also could be completely, totally different. Somebody could have possibly copycatted the Black Dahlia murder. This person could have decided to do their own thing, and it ended up being very similar to the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, and as sick as what I'm about to say is gonna sound, someone could have had inspiration from the Black Dahlia killer, and that could have inspired them to kill Jean French. Did Dr. George Hodel murder Elizabeth Short? Her mouth slits were obviously done by a surgeon. He is the only suspect right now that we know who had surgical and anatomy knowledge. So I do think that it is very possible that Dr. George Hodel could have murdered Elizabeth Short. One main thing is that his daughter Tamar talks about how he would, with the artist Man Ray, he would host parties with Hollywood guests, and they would have these guests like strip naked, and they would do some horrific things to them. And even the fact that Dr. George Hodel did horrific things to his own daughter makes him very capable of murder. And obviously whoever murdered the Black Dahlia did have to have some surgical knowledge, because the way she was cut open, you can't really make that up. An ordinary person is not going to be able to make those clean cuts and everything. He did that. When her body was found, it was completely clean, and surgeons practice like being clean, and they know how to kind of clean up the mess after like a surgery or whatever. Even though he wasn't a surgeon, but he had like the anatomy knowledge and studied a little bit of it in medical school, makes him perfectly capable of pulling this off. And then another factor why he could be involved is a week prior to Short's murder, he purchased a bunch of concrete bags to remodel his house. So it is a little bit weird that he decided to remodel his house a week earlier. And also one of these bags were found, like a similar looking bag was found where Elizabeth was found, and police say that he could have used this to place her body there.
It could be George Hodel. It could be somebody that he personally knew as well. Maybe like a colleague or an old friend who also surgical knowledge. He also could have had help in getting away with his murder as well.
He could have gotten help from the artist Man Ray as well, because Man Ray was also a pretty sick man too.
Dr. George Hodel's daughter, Tamar, told the police before Elizabeth Short's murders that her father was sexually abusing her and many other victims along with his friends. However, the LAPD ignored her. Why did the LAPD dismiss her? Back then, back in the 40s, they didn't really take accusations towards men and, like, you know, fathers and grandfathers and all stuff of sexual abuse very seriously. They just, you know, back in the times back then, it was, you are owned by a man. The man can do whatever he wants to you, whether it's your husband, your father, whoever. And also at the time, the LAPD was very corrupt, and they were actually some of them were in the back pocket of George Hodel, so they would do anything to keep him in good graces, keep him out of jail, etc., etc. So they would just, whoever she decided to tell in the LAPD, if it was somebody who was in his back pocket, would just sweep it under the rug and dismiss it just to, you know, stay in his good graces.
Yeah, and a good point to mention as well is Dr. George Hodel was a doctor, so he obviously had a lot of money, and so maybe the LAPD felt like if they were to try to charge her father with sexual assault, George Hodel could easily get a lawyer. So maybe the LAPD chose to go against that because obviously her dad had plenty of money to bail himself out. They might have also agreed because George Hodel gave them some money to be quiet, and basically officers don't make a whole lot of money, so they just decided to take his money and just be quiet about it and just take his side because they wanted money, which is fucked up, but that's just the way it is. And like you said, back then, women were not treated nearly the same as they are now. A lot of women back then had to marry young. It was either marry young or starve in the streets, and getting married at such a young age often resulted in them being victims of domestic violence. And also, Hollywood has been known to be a place where many people have still been sexually assaulted, and it just continues to happen because that's just the way Hollywood runs, and these people have money and they can pay to lure up, even with all the fucked up things they do. Like, producers have been known to sexually abuse young teenage girls, and they're able to get away with it because they have the money to lawyer up. Like you said, a lot of people don't want to think a celebrity as being a fucked up person, so pretty much everyone just tries to cover it up and pretend like they're all glamorous and they haven't done these horrible things. Tamar was sexually abused by her father. She had a baby at 15 years old. Is this baby actually Dr. George Hodel's baby? So it is possible that it could be Dr. George Hodel's baby because Tamar was raped when she was 14 years old by her own father, and she did give the baby up for adoption. If her father did get her pregnant, it would make sense that he would want her to give the baby up for adoption, because otherwise, if they kept the baby, then the police might have required a DNA test for the baby, and come to find out that Dr. George Hodel is guilty, and then he would lose his medical license. that could be why she ended up giving the baby up to adoption. We will never know if this truly was Dr. George Hodel's baby.
Incest. Sexual abuse. People are fucked up, and it's not a new thing that sometimes the baby is fathered by their grandfather. Disgusting old man. Dr. George Hodel advised Man Ray, who was also a very sick man. One of his paintings with the lovers, which involved a cut-up woman, was this a result of Dr. George being inspired by Man Ray's artwork? I feel like if you draw something fucked up like that and expect people not to follow that, you are fat fucking wrong. First of all, that is an awful painting to draw. That is just leaving tons of possibilities open for people to go out there and murder women like that. Like, why would you draw that? Paintings and like music and all that stuff are big influences on people, and people like Man Ray, a sick ass man, painting a woman being cut up, definitely would inspire someone like George Hodel to go out there and cut up a woman and just leave her out naked on the side of the road. So I think it's very, very possible, especially if Dr. Hodel very closely admired him and was good friends with him as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Because, like, if we think about it every day, we look at certain paintings, and they generally, like, inspire us, and they should inspire us to do good things. But there is also some really dark, messed up artwork that people have, and some people take that artwork too far, and in this case, Dr. George was so inspired he actually literally cut up a woman like that. That's unfortunately what happens because people are so interested in his artwork.
That's like when rap artists started sagging their pants.
Yeah.
Guess what happened? People started sagging their pants and they started looking like dumbasses.
Because I think they're cool.
Yeah, it's so cool to have your pants hanging at your ankles. Everyone can see your tighty whities.
And people also, like, start doing drugs and stuff because of certain songs. They're like, oh.
Because it comes mainstream.
Yeah.
That's why.
You really should not do that. Regardless of whether or not the thing they're doing is right, they're going to copy that artist because they think it's cool.
And drugs and alcohol are not what it's chalked up to be.
Not worth it.
Nah, it's actually pretty disgusting.
Who do we believe killed the black dog? The main person I truly do believe is Dr. George Hodel. We have mentioned so much information about him that even if he did not kill her, this man was a sick person. But there's so much evidence that pretty much makes him seem very guilty. He sexually abused his own daughter and potentially impregnated her with his child. He also was really inspired by this artist named Man Ray, who drew drawings such as a cut-up woman and the way the Black Dahlia and Jean French's body, both of their bodies were found cut up. Also, the fact that his own son was actually like a retired investigator and believes that his own father did it makes me think that he could have potentially did it. He also was one of the few suspects that had the anatomy knowledge and medical knowledge that, he would know how to cut open a body and wipe it clean from blood. I truly think that he is most likely the one who killed her.
He did something.
Yep.
Whether it was to her or not. Thank you for listening to another episode of Murders, Mysteries, and More. Remember to always keep your eyes open. You never know when someone's watching.